What is going on, you guys? Theo here with the big review, back yet again with another King of Fighters All-Star video, and today we are going to be doing something a little bit fun. For a change, we are going to be taking a look at 5 characters that I would love to see buffed in the future. But before we get into all of that, if you haven't already done so, make sure you smash that like button and subscribe. Helps me out a ton as a new YouTuber. So today I figured what we would do, since we are going to need a little bit more time on my end to get together some of these guides that I'm working on for the rest of the week. I had to wait until the payday today in order to even record those and start those. So today we're going to be doing a list, and this is in no particular order, and I haven't put a ton of thought into what I would do with these characters, but I have put thought in the past into it and figured I'd make some observations and kind of just throw some ideas out there, and then in the comments we can all maybe compare notes and talk about what we think would help these characters as well. But basically what this is going to be is just 5 characters that I am personally biased to, so I actually get to be biased for once in a video. Yay! But we're going to go ahead and take a look at these characters in no particular order and discuss why we think they need buffs and the different things that could happen to make them relevant again. With the recent confirmation that we're getting a new survey in the game that is going to determine the next set of buffs and the next round of buffs, which I'm very, very happy that they're buffing these characters and not just leaving them behind entirely. I figured this was a good time to do so, since we're probably going to start seeing them more aggressive with some of these buffs, since a lot of people are really happy with it, and I think everybody should be really happy. Again, this is another benefit of this dev team, which does get a lot of flack, but I do feel some of it is at times unwarranted, that they're willing to go back and do these things, because most dev teams would just release new versions without even thinking about the old ones. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into the list. The first character that I would like to see buffed would be Orochi Shermy. So basically with Orochi Shermy, she's got a pretty interesting kit overall. She's going to have a ton of options for stun as well as shock damage. But I think that what she really is lacking and what would really help her out, and I'm not going to get into what I think Netmarble would do with any potential future buffs for any of these characters, because that's all purely speculation, but really what I would like to do instead is just kind of talk about a little bit of what I think would help them. You know, by no means have I sat down and put in any, massive thought into a full kit for each one of these characters, but just off the cuff, off the top of my head, things that I feel like would be beneficial for them. For her, I feel like she could definitely use a little bit of damage immunity. I think that would go a long way for her. She does have super armor on her kit, but outside of that, she does not have any damage immunity, and as a green attack type, that attack typing obviously is going to make her a little bit squishy. So it would be nice if they could give her something to help her mitigate damage. And then beyond that, having, I think, Shock Explosion at this point would also be very beneficial. If you look here at her cores and everything, really, she has kind of an odd core set. She is an older FES, so, I mean, it's going to be the case for a lot of these older FES, but her last core you'll see is Good Night, and it removes attack decrease debuffs upon landing an ultimate move and stuns the target for a stack count at times 1.2 seconds. Very oddly worded. This character needs to be updated. I think wording-wise, she needs to be updated too. Yeah, so overall with her, I think she's just kind of in a messy spot with things. I think they could do with cleaning her up just a tad and giving her a little bit of help in that regard. Overall, she isn't a bad character, and I think that with some help, she could actually see a decent amount of play. It's just going to require them to kind of put some thought into what it would take in order to get her to that point. However, I don't think that she's the worst FES in the game. Obviously, she's not Yashiro. So that is going to be Orochi Shermy. I do think she's deserving of a buff. She has a ton of fans out there too, and I think that would make them happy as well. So let's go ahead and move on to the next character that I would like to see buffed. Next up on the list, we have Nakaruru, and Nakaruru is a longtime personal favorite of mine. I do like this character quite a bit. However, in this game, she does need some help in order to make herself relevant. But I will say, she doesn't seem like she needs as much help as some of these characters that you're going to see on this list, particularly the next one. But with Nakaruru, I think the biggest thing for her is she doesn't have a whole lot of protection. Now, she does have 1 second of damage immunity on her kit, but really 1 second of damage immunity is sort of a meme at this point, so she could definitely do for help there. And then another thing that would help her out quite a bit, I feel, is getting a little bit of penetration on her kit. So really with her, having bleed and burn makes her sort of unique and very, very nice and juicy for the PvE side of the game. However, that being her only real benefit to her kit really does hurt her. So at the end of the day with her, she has a really, really nice leadership skill that could be very relevant alongside having those 2 dots on her kit. It's just that she needs something else to protect her, because if she gets caught, she's going to get destroyed, and there's really no way around it for her as she sits right now. So giving her that damage immunity, I feel like would really, really help her at the end of the day. And even a little bit of power charge rate might even help. You could say that for any character though, so that kind of goes without saying. But Nakaruru is a pseudo-protagonist for Sam Show in general, having come out right around the time the Sam Show collab came out. And she is a very popular character with the fan base. In fact, many years ago there was a poll done, and she made, I believe, the top 5 for the most popular character amongst the fan base. And of course this is going back several years, but still, that gives you an idea of how she is a beloved character in the franchise, both for Sam Show and to a lesser extent King of Fighters. So I do want to see her get some help down the road, but I do think that even if it's just because it would make her more beneficial for the PvE side of the game, that would be great. It doesn't matter to me really if she ends up becoming some sort of goddess in PvP one way or the other. However, I would like to see her relevant somewhere. So, like I said, she's not a character that needs a ton of stuff, but she is somebody that is lacking, and you see that a lot with some of these outdated characters. They just lack help when it comes to sustain, and that is really to their detriment. Even though the rest of their kit might be pretty nice, they just need that extra help to stay alive a little bit longer. So that's Nakaruru. Let's move on to a character that needs a lot more help. So with Chrysalid here, who is going to be the next topic of conversation, he's always been an interesting character, and he actually saw some pretty niche uses for a long time, and he still has some niche uses to this day. His biggest claim to fame has always been the fact that he is going to see play by default as a red balance in RHD, as one of the few red balance characters out there that is going to be a FES. So he does have that to kind of always keep him at least somewhat relevant. The issue with him is he's completely built around this idea that he needs to be below half health in order to get the benefit of most of his kit, and that really works to his detriment. He's one of those characters that you don't really necessarily want to use for much else outside of that, because he doesn't do much at the start of a round. So if they did some things to help him out in that regard, that would help his case a ton. With some extra penetration, maybe even some damage immunity, like we had talked about with Nakaruru, that pairing for him also remains relevant here, but also some PG gain in general also would help him quite a bit. Just anything that gives his kind of beginning game more help, so that it also benefits his end game as well, because if a character is completely built around already being at half health, then that isn't really a good case to be made there for you being a relevant character for very long. He needs something else to help him out early game so that his end game is just that much better. Because again, you don't want to take a character into things like PvP or PVAI even that does pretty much nothing for you until they're already almost dead to begin with. So, I don't think that we'll probably see much help for him until we get a Boss Syndrome version, to be honest with you guys. I think the coded version of him at some point will probably drop, and that will be the closest we get to help for him for a while. But you never know. They did it with Orochi and Boss Syndrome Orochi, so maybe he'll kind of be a similar case. However, I do think that he could be kind of scary if they did do that. So let's go ahead and move on to the next character that's actually pretty darn decent overall. Next up, we have Ash, and Ash is pretty close to being where he needs to be. I think with him, his obvious glaring issue is he needs something to break guard first and foremost, would probably benefit him more than anything. And also maybe even an interrupt on his kit would be nice. Now his entire shtick really is going to come down to he is going to punish people who use dot on him, and then he is also going to obviously have his great HP recovery. He already has damage immunity and things like that. So like I said, with him, I don't think he's too far off. It really just comes down to he's going to need something to help break guard, and maybe even an interrupt, things to make him a little bit more aggressive, because as he sits, he tends to almost play very defensively, and that doesn't really help him out a ton for what he is trying to accomplish. I think he'd be far scarier if he had things to help him in those regards. The penetration ramping his damage would be a huge boon to him, and then, like I said, being able to punish people who are going to be guarding on him would also really work out, because then he'd be able to fully take advantage of some of the things he's trying to do with his kit. But those things are probably going to end up yet again happening with a future boss syndrome version of him. I know a lot of people are expecting Dark Ash, probably going to happen. I would have a hard time believing they're going to be able to resist doing that version of him anytime soon, so look out for that one. I think it's probably destined to happen, and when it does, I'm sure that he is going to give every other darkness dealer in the game a run for their money. But overall, I'd still like to see this version buffed, because this is a fun character to play, very fun looking to play too, because he's very stylish with his skills and colorful, and he has a lot of fun, but he does need the extra help. Being a green defense helps him out a ton as well, because it makes him relevant in RHD, and he's one of the few really good green defenses that we got, as well as having a fantastic leadership skill. You'll see down there that it increases green element fighters' attack by 45% and their power charge rate by 20%. So overall, he has a lot going for him. I'd just like to see him be able to keep up with the current meta. However, like I said, he is, of all the characters on this list besides maybe the next one, the closest to being where he needs to be. Just give him a few things to get him up to date with everybody else and up to speed, and then kind of see what happens, because I do think he's one to keep an eye on if they ever give him a buff. You'll probably notice a lot of people start using him, because he used to be a very scary character, and he's just kind of been outdated over time. So that's going to be Ash. Let's move on to the last character I wanted to talk about today, and that is going to be this guy. Now, speaking of characters that are not far off from being really, really strong, Geese Howard is very close to being a character that could see a lot of play. And I think that there are a few things here or there that would really be beneficial to him. Now, really what he needs stuff that is kind of similar to what some of these other buffed characters have gotten. He needs to be able to interrupt with one of his skills or two of his skills somewhere. He needs to have guard crash somewhere, and I think just those two things alone would put him very close to over the top. However, another thing that would be very nice for him is more access to power charge. If those three things happened with him, he would actually be very, very scary. Now, when you look at his skills, his first skill really doesn't do a whole lot, increasing attack by 20% for 10 seconds, although the 10-second buff is pretty nice. However, he has a stun, and that is going to work even if they're guarding. He has damage immunity. He's going to have shock damage on his kit. He's also going to decrease attack speed and movement speed to the enemy, which is also nice. And then down here on his finisher, he's actually going to have more lightning. And if you look at his cores, he actually works off that even more with having, upon landing a critical hit, deals shock damage equal to 3 times the remaining shock damage and removes shock effect from the enemy, and they cannot recover HP for 8 seconds. That's on a cooldown of 15 seconds. And he's going to have super armor upon landing a blast skill. So that first core there that we talked about is going to obviously be shock explosion. So he's very close to being very viable. I just think that he does need help with his power charge. That's the main thing. Help him with the power charge, then give him some of these other things like maybe interrupt again, or disable roll, or guard crash especially. Those things in particular, I think, would make him a very strong candidate for things like PvP, PVAI, and then obviously in some of the different dungeons and things, if his power charge rate were to a point where he was able to spam his finishers more, then he would be in a great place. However, unfortunately, and you guys probably already have thought about this, he is another character that is more likely to just get a boss syndrome character before anything. However, again, Orochi got buffed along with Orochi, the boss syndrome version of Orochi, coming out like a week or two apart. So, you know, overall, I think that it is possible that he gets a buff. He's popular enough to where I think if there is a vote, he wins or gets close to winning. But in the end, I think that it's just one of those things where, as much as the boss syndrome characters are fun and interesting, I would prefer to see some of these other characters buffed alongside them to try to at least keep them somewhat relevant. As it sits now, Geese Howard's a strong red pick, but he's not a super relevant one, and I would like to see him be relevant because it is Geese Howard, and Geese Howard being the character that he is to the franchise of not just Fatal Fury, but also King of Fighters, he deserves to be more relevant in this game. But that's pretty much the characters that I wanted to talk about today, guys. Obviously, there's plenty of options in here, and everybody's going to have their favorites, but those are just some of mine. You guys can let me know who your favorite ones are in the comments section down below. Again, I hadn't put a ton of thought into what I would like to see on these characters. I haven't built like a fantasy kit for any of these characters or anything like that. It's just off the top of my head, kind of just through observations of their kits and kind of playing with them before. Just different things that I would like to see them have in order to keep them up with where we're at in the game now, because a lot of these characters are just older. So anyway, guys, that's going to be the video today. If you haven't already done so, like, share, and subscribe. I will see y'all in the next one. Peace.